Bread? Let them eat cookies. What if I told you there was an anime with a historical setting, strong female protagonist, and it's not solely centered around romance? You'd probably say, Bob, that sounds really awesome. What is it called? Well, it is called Rose of Versailles, and it's from 1979. Then that's when I get the, 70s anime type of reaction, but fear not, because Rose of Versailles will not only change your perspective on 1970s anime, but it will enrich your anime watching experience as a whole. This story is set in mid-1700s France during the time directly leading up to the French Revolution. This is a very tragic story, as these were very dark times. Our protagonist Oscar is born into nobility, being the fifth daughter of the commander of the Royal Guard. Due to her father's desire to have a male to carry on the family name as well as replace him when it's time for him to retire, he decides to raise Oscar as a man. Due to Oscar's unorthodox upbringing, she possesses both the strength of a man and the elegant beauty of a woman. When it comes time for Oscar to take her rightful place as commander of the Royal Guard, she does so reluctantly, as her first duty is to guard the new queen. And if you're familiar with world history, you are probably aware that Queen Marie-Antoinette was a very significant character for French history, as she symbolized the alliance between longtime rivals France and Austria. Marie-Antoinette was an innocent and sheltered young woman who took quite a while to adjust to French court politics. Both her and her appointed husband, King Louis, they don't really share much in common, aside from the fact that they exhibit all of the wrong traits for people in their positions. Queen Marie is far too trusting, spoiled, and totally ignorant of economics, and King Louis, on the other hand, is shy and easily influenced. This becomes the perfect combination for eventual disaster as they slowly ruin their country. You have to consider that at this time, French economy was already pretty bad, and Queen Marie would often buy these elaborate dresses at exorbitant prices while her people were starving to death in the streets, and then King Louis was no one to say otherwise, simply because he just couldn't speak up for himself. Don't be fooled by any of the Queen's fancy dresses, because underneath that dress, she wears the pants in the relationship. However, as commander of the Royal Guard, Oscar is stuck in the position of painfully observing everything crumble around her, and despite the fact that she has such a close relationship with the Queen herself, she just can't advise her on what to do because that's beyond her pay grade. Though the story is only 40 episodes long, it contains much more content than you might expect because it's split into several mini-arcs revolving around conflicts created by heartless and manipulative antagonists. Even though Queen Marie eventually becomes a bit of a background character, she's still characterized and developed due to the court's appearances of infinite wealth and trusting faces which lead her down the path to ruining her country. Additionally, Oscar receives a great amount of characterization and development as she's introduced as a strong-willed woman who's insulted by the notion of gender roles, but she's not ashamed of being a woman. She wears it as a badge of honor. She wears it with pride, and there are even times when she will insult a man by saying, "You're just afraid of losing to a woman in a duel," and you know that's gonna get him angry. Oscar's development comes in the form of her experiencing firsthand the enormous gap between the rich and the poor, first being when she ventures outside of the castle walls and seeing how children are killed in the streets by nobility simply for the sake of cruelty, and how some families are so poor that they can't afford medicine and they can only afford to split a potato between their entire family a day. Oscar is also faced with several difficult situations which in turn develop her character as well. One great example of this was the time when one of her soldiers needed to sell his rifle in order to feed his family, and of course this is a crime punishable by death, so what does she do in that situation? Despite the story being set in such a dark point in history, it's not totally centered around despair, though a lot of it is. There are a few romances which are scattered throughout the story in the forms of affairs, love triangles, and unrequited love. My one complaint about the story is just that Oscar has no goals. The story is so heavy-handed in dishing out all of this tragedy that it can feel exhausting to to watch in long bursts, and I feel that if Oscar had goals, that would create additional incentive and also more suspense as we look forward to Oscar completing these goals, regardless of if she does or not. Rose of Versailles features several male characters, though they mostly appear as background characters with the exception of Oscar's servant, Andre, the most developed male by a long shot, which sounds a bit off when you consider how prominent of a character Queen Marie was, and when you take into account where and when this is set in French history, you would also expect to see a bit more of King Louis as well, but he gets about 10 minutes of screen time throughout the entire series. Here's the thing though, Rose of Versailles doesn't attempt to become this literal retelling of historical events. It's just the story of a fictional character who's basically existing within these times. One interesting bit of information I uncovered while preparing for this review was that Queen Marie-Antoinette was originally intended to be the main character. That is, until Oscar received an unexpected amount of popularity, and I can actually see some evidence behind this when you consider how the first parts of the story are structured, where it spends so much time focusing on Queen Marie. However, having said that, I think it worked out much better that Oscar is the protagonist because she is much more interesting and outspoken, and on top of that, Queen Marie was so oblivious to any of the problems within herself or her kingdom, and we needed Oscar's perspective to bring light to many of these issues. While I won't spoil any of these characters' personal endings, I will say that the story carries on up until the point directly after the first major event of the Revolution and manages to create closure for all of our characters. Moving on to the presentation, Rose of Versailles is consistent in terms of animation, and they also featured a high amount of detail for its time in the characters' outfits and surroundings as well, and I also appreciated the fact that they beautifully articulated the strong divide between the rich nobility and the poor as dirt commoners of the time, and I appreciated the fact that they did that because it added extra emphasis on the divide between the classes here, and they also did an amazing job of articulating the characters' emotions through their expressions. Moving on to the music, the soundtrack is a bit sparse. They kind of use some of the same songs over and over, but I like those songs, so it's fine, and the openings and closings, they stuck with me, and I never felt the need to skip either of them once. As of right now, there is no English dub for Rose of Versailles, but the Japanese audio works great. My final score for Rose of Versailles is a 9 out of 10. Admittedly, this would be a bit lower if it had come out a few decades later, but when comparing this to anything else of the 70s that I've seen so far, it goes above and beyond across the board. There's just nothing out there that delivers this level of tragedy, especially in the 70s. Even nowadays, it's hard to compare this to some of the more modern shows because it just does it so well. Even though it can be heavy-handed in terms of its drama, and they really didn't try to give any balance with positive and negative, you of course have to consider the time that this was based in, and that is of course going to impact the type of story that you're seeing. Nonetheless, I think this is a show that everyone should check out. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Lastly, I wanted to give a special thanks to the Undefeated Magician on Patreon for requesting this great anime. Stay tuned for next time when I review White Album 1. Thanks for watching.